It's a fear that lives deep inside all of us, a cold, dark dread that whispers in the quietest moments of the night, taphophobia, the fear of being buried alive. It's not just about death, it's about the horrifying space in between. The unimaginable terror of waking up in a box. Your world is 6 sides of wood. The air is thick and stale, tasting of earth and your own panic. Imagine the moment of realization. Your eyes flicker open, but you see nothing. You try to sit up. Your head hits a hard surface just inches above your face. You are trapped. You are buried. The weight of the world, literally, is on top of you. The year is 1937. The place is Saint-Quentin-de-Chalais, France. A young man named Angelo Hayes, only 19 years old, goes for a motorcycle ride. But on this day, his ride ends in disaster. A brutal crash throws him from his bike. When help arrives, they find a scene of devastation. Angelo is unresponsive. The local doctor examines him and finds no pulse, no breath. He is declared dead. Within 2 days, Angelo Hayes is placed in a coffin and lowered into the cold French earth. The sound of dirt hitting the lid of his casket is the final note in his short life, or so everyone believed. But deep beneath the ground, in the silent, suffocating dark, something was happening. Angelo was not dead. He was in a deep coma, his body's function slowed to an almost undetectable level. 2 days passed. Down in the darkness, Angelo slowly, agonizingly, began to emerge from the coma. He was buried alive. But fate, or perhaps the insurance company's greed, intervened. They demanded an exhumation to verify the cause of death. When the coffin was raised and the lid pried open, the investigators were met with a shocking sight. Angelo Hayes's body was still warm. His eyes were wide with terror. His hands were covered in bloody scratches. The inside of the coffin lid was covered in bloody scratches. He was alive. We travel now to South Carolina in the summer of 1915. A woman named Essie Dunbar, 30 years old, suffers what appears to be a fatal epileptic seizure. It was a violent, terrible fit. When it was over, she lay still. The town doctor was called in and pronounced Essie Dunbar dead. The funeral was scheduled for the next day. The funeral service was a somber affair. Friends, family, the minister spoke his final words. Essie was placed inside her coffin. The lid was nailed shut. She was lowered into the freshly dug grave in the churchyard. Essie's sister was running late. She raced against time, desperate for one final goodbye. Just as they were patting down the last of the dirt, Essie's sister arrived. She was frantic, begging to see her sister. Reluctantly, they agreed. The gravediggers picked up their shovels again. With a creak of protest, they pried the nails from the lid and lifted it open. What happened next became a local legend. As the lid was lifted, Essie Dunbar sat straight up in her coffin. She smiled at her grieving sister and the stunned mourners. The 3 gravediggers fell backward into the grave. The minister fainted. Chaos erupted as people fled in terror, believing they had witnessed the rising of the dead. In 1968, an Irishman from County Tipperary named Mike Meany decided he would do the unthinkable. He would attempt to break the world record for being buried alive. He had a coffin specially built by a local undertaker, complete with padding, breathing tubes for air, tubes for food and water. On February 21, 1968, a crowd gathered in a builder's yard in Kilburn, London. They watched as Mike Meany, after eating a hearty last meal, climbed into his coffin. He was sealed inside, and the coffin was lowered into a pit over 10 feet deep. The dirt began to fly. Shovelful by shovelful, Mike was buried. He was now alone in the total darkness, with only the tubes connecting him to the world above. His goal, to stay buried for 61 days. The days turned into a grueling routine, but the psychological toll was immense. He was in a sensory deprivation chamber of his own making. He battled loneliness, anxiety, and the constant nagging fear that something could go wrong. Finally, on April 22nd, 1968, after 61 days and nights in the earth, the time came. When the lid was opened, Mike emerged, pale and bearded, but triumphant. He had done it. He had faced the primal fear head on and won. In 1987, in Kankakee, Illinois, a wealthy media heir named Stephen Small lived a comfortable life. But he had become the target of a monstrous plot. A man named Danny Edwards and his girlfriend, Nancy Risch, planned to kidnap him and demand a ransom. On September 2nd, they lured Stephen from his home with a fake phone call, pretending to be the police. When he arrived, he was abducted at gunpoint. This was not a simple kidnapping. Edwards had built a crude wooden box about 6 feet long, 3 feet wide, and 3 feet high. It was a makeshift coffin. He forced Stephen Small inside this box and drove him to a remote wooded area. He buried the box in a sandy patch of ground, leaving only a small PVC pipe sticking out of the earth for air. The pipe was poorly designed, barely adequate. Imagine the absolute horror for Stephen Small. He was trapped in a rough, splintery box, buried under 3 feet of sand. The air was thick and humid. Every breath was a struggle. The FBI traced the ransom calls, but time was running out. The flawed design of the breathing tube was fatal. It was not providing enough air to sustain a human life. By the time authorities located the burial site and frantically dug him up, it had been hours. When they finally opened the box, they found he had died. In October 2005, a massive earthquake devastated parts of Pakistan. Buildings crumbled into dust. Entire villages were wiped from the map. Among the missing was a 40-year-old woman named Naksha Bibi. She had been in her kitchen when the world started to shake violently. The walls and ceiling came crashing down around her, plunging her into darkness and silence. Naksha was not killed by the collapse. She was trapped. She found herself in a small, triangular pocket of space, pinned under what was left of her kitchen table. Her legs were crushed by debris. She was surrounded by the rubble of her own home. It was a tomb of concrete and steel. In the total darkness, injured and alone, she could hear nothing but the ringing in her ears. Her survival was a miracle of chance and circumstance. A leaking pipe from a collapsed bathroom dripped water near her face, providing just enough to drink. She also found a small piece of rotten food, a scrap from her former life that she rationed to stay alive. She had no concept of time, only a cycle of waking and sleeping in the pitch-black void. She prayed. She thought of her family, wondering if they were alive or dead. For 63 days, Naksha Bibi remained buried alive, an eternity, but her family refused to give up hope. Her brother kept returning to the ruins of their home, calling out her name. One day, he heard a faint sound, a weak whisper from beneath the rubble. Frantically, he and other villagers began to dig with their bare hands. Hours later, they pulled a skeletal, barely conscious Naksha from the wreckage. She had survived for over 2 months in a concrete grave, a testament to the incredible resilience of the human spirit. The year is 1851. The place, New York City. A young woman named Virginia McDonald lived with her family, but she fell gravely ill and was pronounced dead. She was placed in a coffin and interred at Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn. Her mother was inconsolable, insisting Virginia was not truly gone. After nearly a week, the family relented. When they pried open the lid, the inside of the coffin lid was shredded. Virginia's fingers were bloody stumps. She had been buried alive. Our final story takes us to Pikeville, Kentucky, late 19th century. A young woman named Octavia Smith Hatcher living a happy life with her husband James. She had just given birth to a baby boy, Jacob, but tragedy struck. The infant died shortly after birth. Octavia plunged into deep, inconsolable depression. Soon she fell into a coma-like state. In January of 1891, she was pronounced dead from an unknown illness. The burial happened quickly. It was a cold winter and embalming was not yet common practice. Octavia was placed in her coffin and buried in the local cemetery. But soon after the funeral, a strange sickness began to spread through the town. Other people fell into the same deep coma-like sleep, only to wake up days later, perfectly fine. It was a sleeping sickness caused by the tsetse fly. A horrifying realization began to dawn on James Hatcher. He raced to the cemetery with a group of men. When they forced the lid open, the sight that greeted them was one of pure terror. Octavia's face was contorted in a scream. The lining of the coffin lid was torn and bloody from her fingernails. She had been alive when they buried her. The stories are over, but the feeling remains, a cold knot in the pit of your stomach. The fear of being buried alive is more than just a fear of death. It is the fear of the process. It is the ultimate betrayal of the senses. Your sight is stolen by absolute blackness. Your touch is limited to the 6 smooth, unforgiving walls of your prison. These accounts show us the many faces of this horror. It can be a medical mistake, a criminal act, or even a stunt gone wrong. But the core experience is always the same: the moment of waking, the dawning realization, and the fight for a single breath in a space meant for the dead. When they were planning to flood the old town of Butler, Tennessee, they dug up graves to move them to a different location. Some of the graves had either collapsed or were robbed, so people opened coffins to make sure the body was still inside. Many families were in shock to find scratch marks on the inside of the coffins, meaning their loved ones had been buried alive. For centuries, this fear was so widespread that people invented safety coffins with bells, flags, breathing tubes, all in a desperate attempt to create a lifeline from the grave. Ultimately, the fear of being buried alive is the fear of being forgotten while you are still here. It's the terror of being erased. The stories of those who have faced this reality leave an indelible mark on our psyche. They are a chilling echo from the void, a whisper from the darkness beneath our feet, reminding us that some nightmares are all too real, and that the scariest place in the world might just be a small, dark box 6 feet underground, or a place where you are not subscribed to tales from the Fiend.